You're listening to the DCAU Review, hosted by Cal and Liam. Streaming on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and at DCAUreview.com. Now, here's today's episode.
Hey everyone, welcome to episode 115 of the DCAU Review. I am one of your hosts, Cal, and with me as he always is, my good brother, good friend, and the gentleman that is our DCAU Review Twitter guru. That's right, we brought back the nickname. Welcome back to the DCAU Review. It's Liam. Liam, episode 115, still sticking in the city of Dakota with Static, and we have another season 3 episode to cover today. So last week we were back in season 2. This week we are back in season 3. Excited to talk about this episode today.
Absolutely. We are picking up pretty much right where we left off. We'll actually have some thoughts on that, I think, once we get into plot about the timeline of this episode compared to the other season 3 episode we reviewed. But we are talking about the episode Gear, which if you are a fan of the show, you might recognize as the episode where Richie goes from just being Static's guy in the chair, so to speak, to being a fully fledged superhero in his own right.
Yeah, it's an interesting episode. Static at times takes a back seat, which I don't think hurts the episode very much. We'll get into that when we discuss our plot here at Liam. As we mentioned, we've only covered a handful of episodes thus far of Static, so it's really hard to fully, I think, capture, especially since we're not going in order with these, but fully capture the sort of metamorphosis that this Richie character takes. But this is sort of a big, as you said, sort of a big deal because he goes from just being Static's buddy that's sort of there to, who knows Static's secret and is there to kind of observe, to kind of being Static's Bruce Wayne to, the Bruce Wayne to Static's Batman Beyond, I guess, where he's sort of helping him out in the field and making inventions for him and all of this. And this is when he finally steps out and steps into his own and becomes a full-fledged member of Static's team.
Yeah, absolutely. And can't wait to jump into all of our categories. But as with every episode, Cal, before we can get into any of that, I, of course, have our official IMDb synopsis to read.
Excellent.
All right, and this is for the episode Gear, as mentioned, which was written by Dwayne McDuffie and Alan Burnett, directed by ? Because it's not included in the credits. Although there's a title called Storyboard Supervisor. So okay. I just wrote that one down. Storyboard Supervisor for this episode is Mark Howard, with music by Richard Wolf and animation by Dongwoo Animation Company. And that synopsis reads as such. In a delayed effect of the Bang Baby incident, Richie gains super inventive abilities and becomes the superhero Gear.
Is super inventive abilities hyphenated?
No, it was not. I feel like it should be. And okay. Like I said, sometime I have to self-edit these a little bit to make them complete sentences.
Gotcha. Yeah, I was going to say super inventive abilities just doesn't roll off the tongue here. So let's see if we can break down the plot a little bit better, Liam, because I don't think it does it quite justice. But as I mentioned, this is sort of a coming-of-age episode for Richie, as the synopsis does allude to. There's a bit of a delay that they realize. Richie is sort of slowly throughout the episode becoming more and more obsessed with inventing things, and clearly is going through some changes. He sort of seems to notice it at times and kind of explains it away. And then Static and him ultimately have a conversation where they seem to deduce that this could be all related to the Big Bang, as it were, that gave Static and a lot of the Bang Babies all of the Bang Babies their powers.
Yeah, and that's they sort of explain it as Static or Virgil went to see Richie kind of just after it happened, and he would conceivably have residue from the gas that gave him his powers still on his clothing that Richie could have absorbed. And throughout the series, there are people who are like developing their powers later. It's not seemingly put out that like every single Bang Baby got their powers the night that it happened. So I guess if you came into contact with the gas even in sort of this minor way, eventually some sort of superpower could rear its ugly head. And here it is for Richie. Yeah, he sort of he's inventing new gadgets at first, and then he's figuring out math problems at the drop of a hat, and is acing his chemistry quizzes and all that. And it all kind of gets them to make this realization, with our B plot sort of being that Static, where the Ebon and his crew have all broken out of jail, and of course Ebon happens to run into Richie, who he previously met in the episode Sons of the Fathers, which you can actually listen to our review of that one in the archives at DCAUreview.com. And we sort of get some build off of that. He figures out, well, if this guy's always around Static, let's follow this guy and figure out who Static is. And it basically works very easily, as it turns out. But yeah, I liked seeing villains who remembered things and who like put together a very simple but smart plot.
Yeah, it was not very difficult. They even remark that as they're doing their reconnaissance, that Richie is hanging out with Virgil, and Virgil has the same hairstyle as Static. And Ebon sort of explains it away, saying that, well, a lot of people have that hairstyle, but is then reminded that not a lot of people with that hairstyle happen to hang around Richie. So there is some villains using their powers of deduction and not just explaining things away, as is so often the case, it seems, in comic books. But yeah, I think that they do a good job of making the plot fun, at least. Before I guess we get into the real meat and potatoes of everything and get our scores and stuff, I have to ask you, I was just thinking about this. Mm-hmm. Of the 3 shows that you and I are fans of that have done a similar storyline, be it Smallville, be it the Flash television series on the CW, or Static Shock, who did the explosion / supernatural event that causes a supervillain of the week to show up trope best?
Yes, we have the Meteor Freaks on Smallville. We have the particle accelerator explosion on the Flash, and then yes, we have the Bang Baby gas here on Static. I'm always preferable, as you know. I'm always gonna probably go for Smallville when topics like these come up. But it's funny how you kind of create your Deus Ex Machina, as it will, as a way to just give your superpowered protagonist a bunch of superpowered antagonists to fight, and you kind of can always go back to that well. And as we see in this episode, even if a character wasn't present at the time in the first episode when we see the event, you can still kind of logic your way into giving other people powers based on the same event, even if they weren't really in the room at the time.
It reminds me a little bit of the Cisco vibe bit that they eventually did for The Flash, and explaining that away, and that he didn't have powers in the first season or 2, I believe, and then suddenly he's a full-fledged team member later on. But we are not here to talk about the Flash television series, Liam. No, we are here to talk about this week's episode. Anyway, I think that this is a fun episode. It's funny. They actually mention a particle accelerator at one point, I believe. Flash. Yes, the Freudian slip there. Static begins talking to Richie and stumbles upon something that he's creating. I believe he asks him if he's creating a particle accelerator. He said yes, which is interesting. Thought that was pretty funny. Overall, I think this episode was a lot of fun. As I said, we were doing the intro, that the spotlight is taken a little bit away from Static at times, and I don't think that that's a detriment. We talked about that being something that they were able to successfully avoid in the crossover episodes thus far that we've reviewed this month, in giving Static the spotlight still. I think this episode does a good job, although it is a familiar trope, as we had mentioned. I think they do a decent job of giving it its fresh spin. I like that the main plot is that Richie is sort of discovering his powers, and that this plot of the supervillains figuring out Static's secret identity is sort of the B plot, but it works and fits well right into the A plot. So I had a lot of fun on this week's episode.
Yeah, no, I think it's a lot of fun, because even once they sort of are figuring out that maybe this is his Bang Baby power, Richie's still like pretty down on himself about it, because he's complaining about why couldn't I fly or get super strength or shoot lasers out of my eyes? Instead, my power is being able to think real good.
Yo, bro, what's that? Plans for a particle accelerator?
Yeah.
I was kidding. Hey, man, why so down? Isn't it fun being a super brain?
I guess. It's just, how come I couldn't get a cool power like super strength or laser vision?
Laser vision?
How am I supposed to fight supervillains? Think them into submission? All I can be is your mega mechanic.
And that's sort of he's sort of disappointed by it, but of course in the end it's all of these gadgets and things that he's created for Virgil are actually what leads him to be able to track Virgil down, and then some of these new weapons that he's devised are enough to kind of let him keep the other Bang Babies at bay. We have Shiv, Kangor, and Talon all returning to be part of Ebon's crew in this episode. And so,
Question.
Yeah.
Have we reviewed an episode yet where a villain has worked by themselves?
No, I think that's a negative, Ghost Rider.
I mean, unless you count the pilot, which has the creation of a whole bunch of Bang Babies ultimately. But I feel like every single episode we've done so far, there's been some conglomeration of villain. How do you feel about that? Because to me, I feel like the other DCAU shows saved team ups. I mean, Injustice League, it was certainly more prevalent with the Injustice Guild or Injustice Gang or whatever you want to call them. But in the original DCAU shows, at least, it seemed that villain team ups were sort of specialized events.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I'm okay with certain ones. Like, I don't know how you make like Shiv into his own like a good enough character to warrant being. I'm okay with having a few like super powered underlings who just work for everybody. So say last week we saw Kangor teaming up with Ferret and Hyde, and this week here he's teamed up with Ebon and Talon. I don't hate that as an idea that they're like underlings within this like new super criminal hierarchy that's established in the Static world. But yeah, to your point, there's also that thing where if has trouble with any one of these people, when they all team up, it's kind of that problem that you always run into with supervillain team-ups, where all of a sudden everybody has to go down a lot easier than they would if they were the sole villain of the episode.
Right.
So like Ebon, who we've established to this point in the series, even in just the couple episodes we reviewed with him, is that he's like, the top guy. He's the baddest of the bad. He's got very like inconsistent, hard to describe powers, and he's and he's sort of the baddest of the bad here, but he sort of has to get taken down at about 20 seconds at the end of the episode, because the rest of the episode, Gear and then Static are fighting Kangor and Shiv and Talon, so there's not that much time left for Ebon to really show off his skills at the end of the episode. So I think that is a problem with doing a lot of supervillain team-ups, is that some of your supervillains almost have to become like less powerful than they were in other episodes, just by nature of their having to share the screen with so many others.
For sure. Yeah, I think that's a very valid point, and I would say that seems to be the case in this episode. I know that they used Richie's what is he called, the bang grenades or whatever they are.
Caps.
Zap caps, that's right. The Zap cap invention that he makes was a good showcase for that, at least initially. But the fact that Richie has almost no problem with 2 or 3 of these guys himself, and having never been in an actual fight before this episode, does sort of take away their sort of threat overall for these guys should they reappear again.
I mean, like, did he kill Talon? Because so, like, as he's trying to break into their headquarters, which is this old abandoned juvenile detention hall, she's like outside on lookout, and he just like crashes into her, and they fall on the ground, and then we don't see Talon again for the rest of the episode. Whereas Kangor and Shiv, like, they're both tied up by these Zap caps, but kind of get free and are able to continue in the fight for another couple minutes. But I was like, I assume she's not, because I'm almost 100% positive this isn't her last appearance. But at the time, I was like, did Richie kill her?
I think there was a stay alive groan, so I think we're safe.
Yeah. All right, good.
Yeah, no, I'll go ahead and give my score for this. Like I said, I think it's very, very strong. I think to date of the episodes that we've done, obviously the Batman crossover episodes that we've done have been fun. But this one, standing on its own, is not having to worry or not having to rely on a crossover star in order to bring the excitement. I thought it was very strong. I think that the writing, Alan Burnett and Dwayne McDuffie, as you mentioned, were in charge of this episode, and I think they did a great job. It feels like it's part of the DCAU. We talked a little bit last week about how the Shaq episode kind of seemed to be on its own planet, or like, the planet Hanna-Barbera, but this one I think feels like it fits in the DCAU without feeling like a straight copy, and without having those crossover heroes. So with that, I had a lot of fun with this one. I gave it a score of 8 out of 10 for plot.
Nice. Yeah, I'm right in that same ballpark. I went 7 out of 10. Yeah, I think this is a good, strong episode. As you said, we kind of, as you said, it's funny that the idea of the supervillains finding out the main hero's secret identity being the B plot, if you just kind of look at that on paper, it seems kind of weird. But using that as sort of of a clever way to sort of have Virgil get captured, and also that little caveat of, well, yeah, he could break out of the cell, but then he fully exposes himself as Static. And him having to rely on Richie with his new powers to figure out a way to free. I thought that was creative. The idea of Richie using a backpack to hack into the cameras and sort of create a loop of footage of Virgil, so that meanwhile Richie could give Virgil the Static suit, and they could break him out. I thought that was really clever.
Right here, V-Man.
Quiet, they might be watching.
They are watching. Reruns. I had Backpack manipulate a loop of you, which he's feeding into Ebon's monitor right now.
Nice.
One funky, fresh superhero costume.
It was a good way to show off that not only is he the gadget guy, but he's also smart. And I thought that was clever. I liked seeing the way the heroes outthought the bad guys in this one.
I thought it was funny. Also, they gave him the I think the villains asked, like, who the heck is this guy or something, and Virgil makes a Boy Wonder joke, I thought, which was awesome. And then later on, where Richie is struggling to come up with a name, he gives 2 name checks, one to Hardware, which was another Milestone Comics hero, and then he also ponders using the name Steel, of course, which is certainly a more well-known superhero, both in the DCAU and the DC universe proper at large. So
I think you're spending more time in front of the mirror than my sister does, and it's starting to worry.
We still gotta come up with a superhero handle. How about Hardware?
I think somebody's using it.
Steel? Well, it's got to say something about all this gear I got.
Gear? What about that?
Gear. Perfectamundo.
Yeah, and like kind of this whole transformation for Gear, the Gear character is sort of vaguely based on another Milestone character called Rocket, who is the sidekick of Icon, who's sort of the Milestone Comics Superman. Yep. That character wasn't Richie Static's friend in the books, but it was this sort of guy who got super smart and fought crime and helped out the main hero with his gadgets. So yeah, that's a lot of little Milestone references throughout this episode.
Which, of course, if you haven't done your research or know anything about Milestone, Dwayne McDuffie certainly is not only the creator of Static, but Static came out of Milestone and created a whole bunch of the other characters in Milestone as well. So, yeah, those characters have been on hold for a little while as far as the DCAU or the DCU proper is concerned, but hopefully we'll see them come back into use in the not too distant future.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
All right, Liam, let's move on to our next category, which is going to be visuals and animation. So, if you recall, last week was, well, it wasn't good. Didn't get high marks from either of us. But it's funny what 1 week will do, and it's certainly what type of appreciation. As you mentioned, I think Dongwoo did the animation for this week's episode, and man, compared to what we watched last week, it's night and day. And while this is maybe a little bit more like The Batman or Jackie Chan Adventures as far as some of the animation, I think that this is leaps and bounds above what we saw last week and sort of skewed my scoring a little bit for this week.
Just the happiness of being away from that season 2 style. But yeah, I think there's some cool stuff just from a visual standpoint. Like I said, I like Richie's gadgets, the new Zap Caps, which are sort of these grenades that burst into these metal cables that tie you up. I think that's cool. I like the design of his backpack, which is kind of, again, sort of this MacGuffin Deus Ex Machina thing that can kind of do whatever he needs it to for the rest of the series. But sort of this, advanced AI thing, and but I like the design of that. I guess at the very end, we do get to see the full real Gear costume.
The question is, can Backpack hack the internet?
Not as good as Static can, apparently.
Thus we know, yes. But yes, we see not only Static's return to Static season 3 costume, but yeah, we get the full reveal of Gear's gear.
Yeah, and it's funny. I like the makeshift costume he has on when he goes out to save Virgil. I thought that was kind of, you get bits and pieces of it. He has the helmet and the rocket shoes and backpack, but he doesn't have the full suit yet. And then sort of right at the end of the episode, they reveal the full design, which of course, if you watched the opening title sequence, you would have already known what he looks like in the suit. But yeah, that's still cool. I will say I guess this is between plot and visuals here, but right at the start of the episode, Richie mentioned something about Static being in his new costume. So I didn't see anything about this while I was doing my research, but I do wonder if this and Hard as Nails got flipped in the episode order. Maybe it was decided that the Batman team up was a stronger season premiere, because this episode is listed as season 3, episode 2, but there's like a name check of, look at Static's in his new costume now. It's like, well, he was already in it last week and nobody mentioned it. So I wonder if there was something about if these got switched around in the episode order.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think I think that certainly makes sense. I think that again, we had talked, which you can hear 2 weeks back. We did Hard as Nails, and we talked about the idea that maybe they picked Batman back-to-back seasons as the lead-in for season premiere in order to draw certain viewers in, or to get new viewers or past DCAU fans to check out Static. as a sort of a strategy. So it makes sense to get people hyped and excited about that, and maybe swap things. But yeah, production order obviously not as readily available on some of the static stuff as we mentioned over the past few weeks. So hard to say for sure. But to me, I think based on that comment alone, I think that's a fair guess.
Yeah, but some other cool visuals. Like I said, this is our return look at Ebon after we previously looked at him in the season 1 episode. His design, and actually most of the bad guys' designs, really were pretty unchanged. It's Static and Richie and some of the other ancillary characters got redesigned and overhauled for this new style, but for most of the bad guys, they're pretty much the same, just sort of slightly updated to fit into this more DCAU proper style. But still enjoy Ebon's visuals. It's a cool look. He's just this black figure in gray vest, and he has this purple highlight on him. And like I said, he can do a lot of different things with his powers depending on what the story needs him to do. He can like teleport, he can stretch, he can like kind of look like turn into liquid. Like he can do
Yeah, so he's like one part Shadow Thief, one part Clayface, one part Mr. Fantastic or Plastic Man or Elongated Man, one part Ink. He's sort of a conglomeration of all those things, and I think that while it makes for an inconsistent character portrayal, it is at least visually interesting because he also does a little bit of shape shifting at times, and his size can change depending on what the scene seems to call for. So I think that visually he has and continues to be the most interesting visually of Static's villains. Hopefully we'll get a chance to. I assume there's a Ebon origin episode, right?
Yeah, I would think so. We'll have to keep an eye on that for future Static months. But yeah, we will have to go back. I think we'll have to go back pretty far into season 1, unfortunately. But yeah, we might find that. I know there's some connections established later on between Ebon and Rubber Band Man as well. Spoiler alert for a 20-year-old cartoon, but so yeah, I know there's some stuff there as well. So there's definitely a little bit more to the mythos of Ebon that we'll certainly look to explore in our upcoming reviews when we come back to Static maybe later this year.
Absolutely. Can't wait to check that out. But yeah, overall, I think that visually this is like I said, it's hard to say how much of it was just, man, I'm so glad to be out of that terrible season 2 animation, and how much of it was really, really good. But I thought that some of the visualizations and nods were interesting. I've got a little bit of a Tony Stark into Iron Man vibe as Gear was trying on his rocket propelled rollerblades at the beginning there, sort of steadying and actually very, very much an Iron Man cartoon transformation vibe from when Static puts on his suit in the next to last scene. He kind of does the full spin, and the music kicks in and the visuals kick in. Really, really great transformation there. I thought that was awesome. We already talked about the villains, and overall just much, much better looking flow, consistency, all of that in this season 3 look. So I gave animation and visuals a very, very strong 9 out of 10.
Wow. Yeah, I'm right in that same ballpark. I gave it an 8 out of 10. A lot of really, really good stuff in this episode, as we covered. And yeah, you mentioned it just a second ago, but that scene of Static putting on the suit, and yeah, you get this kind of big 360 shot of him, and then it cuts to him in the cell with his hands glowing, and there's sort of a shot for a second of him in shadow. It's sort of the lights flickering around the cell. It's really, really cool and really well done. And and the last little visual bit I'll mention is at the end, Static uses his little saucer that he flies around on. He just uses that to flatten Ebon against a wall and zap him. And after he's done. Ebon's become the 2D man from Batman Beyond. I thought that was a really, even though as we talked about in plot, it's a little silly that the biggest bad got taken down so easily. It was still from a visual standpoint a pretty clever way to do it.
Yeah, I agree with you. So yeah, both strong scores from us thus far here. Let's move on to our next category, Liam, which has been a very controversial or not, it's been a very interesting category to rank the last couple weeks. I don't know that this week is going to be very different. But let's talk about music here. I've gone on rants the last 2 weeks about music, so I will let you go first. What were your thoughts on music this week?
Yeah, I didn't have a ton of notes about music this week, which might be good news for you. But I liked the same things that I have liked. I wanted more of the Kangor theme. We get a little bit of that, but that was probably my favorite villain theme that we've heard so far. So I like that. I like how there's kind of little musical interludes for all of the different bad guys in Ebon's crew. We don't really have at least I picked up on, there's the gear theme, which is you only sort of hear in the background as he's crafting some of his weapons and gear, for lack of a better term. It actually reminded me quite a bit of that weird little interlude or crescendo that plays whenever Brainiac shows up in Superman.
Yes.
That sort of like $6 Million Man sounding thing, which is like the super techno thing. We get a little bit of that with gear, and then we don't have as much lyrics in our music this week. We do have one song as the villains come together where it's just a guy going, "This is how we roll," over and over again, and that made me laugh, so I liked that. But yeah, I didn't notice as much, like we said, that scene where Static puts on the suit in the cell and transforms, and the Static theme plays and comes to crescendo with the people shouting "Static Shock" as it cuts to the next scene. I thought that was cool. So yeah, I liked the music this week, but I didn't feel there was as much to talk about as there has been maybe the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that there certainly were still a few times where there were some lyrics interjected into the music, which if you've listened to the last 2 weeks, you know that's been my biggest gripe about Static, and that appears to be, I guess, sort of what they ultimately decided to do now that we are 6 or 7 episodes into reviewing Static Shock. That seems to be their signature thing, so I suppose it's something that I should prepare myself for as we continue to review the show, but I that doesn't make me enjoy it anymore. I think that this week they did tone it down a lot. Certainly was not as distracting as I felt it was in that episode. Kangor's theme, as we mentioned last week during that episode, it was cool that they at least kept that going, and that's still his theme, even though the visuals have changed, that the audio cues still seem to stay the same. So with that said, and then of course, in that scene that we mentioned just a moment ago where Static does his 360 change, you get the season 2 Static theme coming through, and that is growing on me. I'm not ready to say that I'm fully on board with lyrics and background soundtrack, but that at least is sort of changing my mind about things, because it does punctuate that scene very well, and it kind of lets you know that, hey, some butt kicking is coming.
Yeah, that's just make note of that, listeners. We are slowly wearing Cal down. Another 8 or 9 episodes of Static, and I think I'll get him to give us. I might even get him to give us like a 6 or a 7.
Well, it's definitely not going to be a 6 or a 7 this episode, based on the fact that it's still there. It's still noticeable to me, but it's certainly much better than the score that I gave 2 weeks ago, and certainly better than the score I gave last week. I am giving music this week a 5 out of 10.
That is fair enough, and I went just a little bit stronger there. I gave it a 7 out of 10.
All right. No disagreement alarm on that one, though. All righty, Liam. Let's move on to our final category for this week, which, of course, is going to be voice acting. So let's talk about our cast. We have, with as many villains as we have represented on today's episode, I imagine we have a bit of a larger cast.
Yeah, for sure. We have a bunch of returning villains who we've talked about in previous episode. We have Brian Tochi returning as Shiv. We have Tia Tejada returning as Talon. We have Kevin Michael Richardson playing Kangor. Doesn't actually play Virgil's dad. Virgil's dad doesn't appear at all in this episode, so he's just voicing Kangor this time. And we have the returning Gary Sturgis as Ebon. I'm sure we talked about this in our first episode that featured Ebon that we reviewed, Sons of the Fathers. But it just really hit me in this episode how Gary Sturgis as Ebon, it's just Ice-T. Like, he's just doing Ice-T's voice.
Never thought we'd all end up back here again.
Isn't it great? No way anybody'd look for us at the old juvie hall.
Spent a lot of time here back in the day.
We were inmates then. Now we run the place.
I always ran the place.
Anything wrong?
Yeah, that kid. His name was Foley. Every time I see him, Static's right there. I shouldn't have let him slip away the first time.
So let's find him.
Just what I was thinking. Start with the high school closest to the jail.
Dakota Union High?
Whatever. Just find him. I want us on that kid like a shadow.
100%. Absolutely. I think I thought to myself about half a dozen times, like, man, he is literally just doing Ice-T. If you've ever watched Law and Order SVU or I think that's the only thing that Ice-T really has acted in, or maybe his show that he had for a while with his wife. I think he had a television reality show. So,
or if you've watched John Mulaney's stand-up comedy specials where he does his impression of Ice-T on Law and Order, all of these. That's basically what you can expect from Ebon as well. It's not bad, but it was just like, oh man, he's just straight up doing an impression. It reminds me of when they have Michael Rosenbaum do his Walken impression when he voices the Ghoul in the Jokers.
Yes.
Like it's very clearly just a straight up, like, I'm doing an impression voice actor.
Absolutely. Yeah, I appreciate it. I think it's really, really interesting, and because it's like they didn't go out and get Ice-T to do the voice. When we know it, which ironically we know that Ice-T did voice one of the splicers in one of the Batman Beyond episodes that we've covered. I believe Splicers, aptly named, which you can hear in the archives at DCAUreview.com. But so to have somebody come on and do what is really just a really good impersonation of him, at times I'm like, man, I wish they had just gotten Ice-T to do his voice. But at the same time, I think it's done so well that you can't help but just stand back and be like, you guys, that's so good.
Yeah, it's really well done, and I like the interactions between him and some of the other guys. There's a line where Kangor is talking about, we used to be inmates at this juvie hall, and now we run it. And Ebon's like, I always ran it, and I just like you. It's very easy to believe that he's the top dog among all these babies. So yeah, I liked the performances from most of the villains there, and then our main actors, we have, of course, Jason Marsden as Richie /Gear, which obviously it's really his episode. But we also, of course, have Phil Lamar as Static, and we in fact get to hear Static use his catchphrase from the comic books at one point when he utters the phrases, "If you don't want none, don't start none." That's actually one of his catchphrases in the original Milestone comics. So, as we said, a lot of different Milestone references in this episode.
This is how we roll. Hey, let's get out of here. The cops are everywhere.
You're worried about the police when I'm here?
Static?
Static. You don't start none, it won't be none.
Yeah, it was good. I mean, I think Alan Burnett got sole writing credit, or at least I think that's what the story by, I think, in the credit said, but clearly he had gotten some consultation from Mr. McDuffie on this episode. So having those nods is certainly very much appreciated.
Yeah, I think it's one of those where it's like story by Alan Burnett, like teleplay, which I think is just the term for the person that actually like writes up the script. So I assume I'm sure like all of this, it's always a collaborative effort with all of the producers and writers on the show. It's just, whoever's name maybe came up with the initial story beats that gets the full credit. But yeah, this is definitely that little bit thrown in. I was like, oh yeah, this has definitely got Mr. McDuffie's fingerprints on it. And then this is the most Richie we've had in any episode so far. And I also think this is the episode where I found him the least annoying, which is a good thing, I would say, considering he talked so much in this episode.
I would agree. I don't know what it was. Maybe it was they didn't limit him to quips and or wise guy speech bubbles. So having him to be able to come in, give full dialogue, plus you're sort of along for the ride in his metamorphosis into this Brainiac type, not Brainiac the supervillain, but Brainiac as in the term.
That comes later this season.
Oh, right. But that's a story for another time. But yes, you're along for the ride. He's not completely and totally annoying as he's been at times. And that's definitely a compliment.
Yeah, and I actually really loved the scene where Ebon's crew shows up to grab Virgil at the high school, because I found Jason Marsden's performance as Richie very relatable in that scene. Because if my best friend was a superhero and the baddest supervillain in town showed up, I would also panic and be a terrible liar in that moment. So when he's screaming, he's not static, I'm like, yeah, no, that's exactly how I would act and exactly what I would say. Like, he's a terrible liar, but I actually think that works better for the scene where you're kind of really getting over just how like frantic and scared he is in that moment.
I kind of was half expecting him to say, I'm static. But he just came up a little short from saying that. So
yeah, that would have been pretty great too. But yeah, I did appreciate that scene, because I was like, yeah, I would also I would also panic and try to throw out terrible lies in that moment. So overall I thought voice acting was pretty darn strong this week, and I actually gave it a 9 out of 10.
Nice. I gave it just a tick lower, but I'm right in the same neighborhood. Gave it a 8 out of 10 for voice acting. Very, very strong scores from us, both on this episode and certainly for voice acting here. I think it's a good showcase. I think that things stand out. We didn't have any guest stars. This is kind of getting an idea of the cast themselves. We have certainly covered a few different crossovers where we've had a lot of familiar voices, but this episode, you kind of get the full Static cast in all of their glory, and they do a really, really good job of making this feel like it fits into the DCAU.
Agreed.
All right, Liam. Well, that will bring us to our final scores for this week's episode. Totaling everything up for this week, I have a very respectable 30 out of 40.
And I am just a tiny bit higher there, and my final score is a 31 out of 40. So, yeah, I think this is definitely the highest rating you've given a Static episode to date here. So, as far as rewatchability goes, I would definitely give this one a thumbs up. Not only is it a fun story, but obviously it's Richie's transformation from, as we said, just sort of being a friend and a confidant to being a true blue hero in his own right. So I definitely think this one gets a thumbs up for rewatchability.
It is, and I don't know if we talked a lot about Richie in this episode, but even as not the main focus, I thought this was a great episode for Static as a whole. I think that it's clear that his character went through sort of a metamorphosis. We talked about in the plot, he's smart. He thinks right off the bat, well, wait a minute, what if the villains here are actually watching me and they want me to use my powers? So it shows that Static isn't just rushing headstrong into this as a typical teenager was. So there's some growth in the character there. He has the opportunity to sort of be a mentor and sort of certainly encourage Richie as somebody who, like you said, he's disappointed in his powers and what powers he gets. So there's some great Static in this episode too. So I would definitely give this a rewatchability. Yeah, definitely check it out. It's certainly pivotal to this third season and ultimately the fourth season, because gear is certainly a major part going forward. But it's also, like we said, as far as non-crossover episodes, which we haven't had a chance to cover a lot of yet, it's fun. It's interesting, and you get some fun visuals and some good voice acting all mixed in together.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's a good point you made, because we sort of we having the benefit of foresight in this case know that one day in this DCAU timeline, Static grows into being one of the great heroes. He joins the Justice League. He's right up there with all of these great legendary heroes when we hear Batman Beyond talk about him later on. So that it's cool to kind of see that him grow from maybe where we see him in some of those early episodes that we've reviewed through to now, and certainly going forward as we review even more Static. So to see that transformation from being sort of this wide-eyed kid just getting a handle on his powers to now being able to sort of be in almost a mentor role to his friend and some of the other people his age who are also dealing with these powers. So yeah, I think that's a great point.
Awesome. All right, Liam. Well, that will bring us to the end of this week's episode. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in and giving us a listen. We are so thankful for that. Don't forget to check us out on our social media pages. As I mentioned at the top of the show, Liam runs our Twitter page. We both run our Instagram page. Both can be found at DCAU Review. Don't forget to check out also later this week, coming up soon, we will have our latest bonus episode in which we discuss the latest 2 issues / 1 issue combined into or split into 2 issues of Batman the Adventures Continue. Don't forget also to check us out on your favorite podcast app. Please subscribe to us. If you have time, leave a review. 5 stars is always helpful, and certainly a detailed review letting us know and other people that might be interested in listening to us know what you like about the program. Liam, I mentioned our Twitter at DCAU Review. I know you had a poll up there over the last week or so asking for input from our fans. That's something they can always do by following us. We do that quite often, and we put a vote up for what the final Static episode that we would be covering in this month of July would be. So why don't you tell the good folks at home just what episode we will be covering?
Yeah, I tried to put up some variety in the poll. I avoided any more crossovers because, as Cal's mentioned, we've done quite a few of those already in our few episodes of Static we reviewed. But I picked a few episodes each from the first 3 seasons. And thankfully, our listeners and our friends and followers on Twitter were merciful to us and did, in fact, pick the one season 3 episode I put in the poll. And we will actually be going to the very next episode of Static, season 3, episode 3, Static in Africa.
Very good. Looking forward to that one. I feel like we were pretty faithful in watching season 3 of Static, from my recollection, during the original run after that Batman episode, and certainly after the animation changed. I remember getting to watch this. I don't remember this episode specifically, but I know that it's pretty popular, and some of our friends, the Tim Talk guys, have covered it, and so I'd certainly look forward to checking that out with you next week, Liam.
Absolutely. Looking forward to that. And yeah, always check out our Twitter and our Instagram at DCAU Review to find out what we'll be reviewing next. And hey, just like with this episode coming up next week, you may even have a chance to help us pick what we're going to review.
Absolutely. We're also coming up on a few milestones. We're almost at 1,000 followers on our Twitter page. We're creeping up towards 1,000 on Instagram. So thank you guys for following us. Share, tell your friends, and you never know what can pop up there. Who knows? Maybe as we creep towards 1,000, we'll get the opportunity to do another giveaway, Liam. That's always fun. But that's a story for another time. And until next week, I am Cal.
And I'm Liam.
And we will talk to you on the very next episode of the DCAU Review.
Bye-bye.